And good afternoon, and welcome to the latest edition of Building a Winning Team with Blair Search Partners. I'm Trevor Blair, founder and CEO of Blair Search Partners, and I am very excited to be here today with my colleague Tori Albertazzi, Managing Director of Blair Search Partners, and our guest today, Ian Gordon, a longtime friend and colleague through the workforce development sector, through the nonprofit sector. We're very excited to dig into a lot of interesting issues with Ian today, on both the executive and transition side, as well as a builder and leader of winning teams. And so I'd love to go ahead and jump right into introductions. Tori, you want to say a quick hello, and then I'll introduce Ian, and we'll be off and running.
Of course. Good afternoon, Tori Albertazzi, Blair Search Partners. I'm excited to be here with my former colleague, friend, and boss, Ian Gordon. So I'm in a unique position today between Ian as my former, Trevor as my current. So I'm excited for this conversation. And where it goes today.
Awesome. And Ian, if you don't mind, I'm going to go ahead and read this very beautiful bio that you put together, because I think it really sums it up nicely. And then we'll jump into the conversation. Ian Gordon is a veteran nonprofit executive with more than 20 years of experience leading mission-driven organizations focused on equity, youth development, workforce, and community impact. He has served in senior leadership roles in mission-driven nonprofit organizations in both San Diego and Washington, D.C., where he's built cross-sector coalitions, secured major investments, and helped shape policies that improved outcomes for children, families, and communities. He has also been a business owner and independent consultant. A recognized thought leader in collective impact and systems change, Ian brings deep expertise in advancing equity and aligning partners across sectors. He is currently exploring his next leadership chapter, committed to driving lasting social impact through bold collaborative action. And from what I have seen of Ian over the years, that is 100% true. Ian, thank you for joining us here, and we are excited to have this conversation with you.
You're welcome, Trevor. Thanks for the invitation, and good to see you again, Tori.
Yeah. Well, let's start with some high-level background. We would love to hear about what brought you to this work way back in the day when you first got into the impact sector, and then we'll go from there.
Sure. And thanks again for the opportunity. It's really great to join you on this podcast. So I was drawn to the nonprofit sector early in my career because I've been motivated by the idea of equity and making sure that children and families and communities have a real chance at social mobility and economic opportunity. And so what's kept me here for more than 2 decades is the ability to see impact at both the individual and the systems level. So whether it's a young person reconnecting to school and career pathways, or it's shaping policies to create better conditions in the community, for me, the work has been deeply meaningful. And I see nonprofits as sitting at a unique intersection between what community needs are, the public systems, private resources, whether it's donors or philanthropy. And so I've loved leading initiatives that bring all those different key stakeholders together for change.
And I'd love to kind of talk a little bit more about our shared history. You and I first met probably 2007 or 8 when you'd first come to San Diego, and you were standing up the youth office inside city of San Diego. And I think you'd been in town about 4 hours, and we somehow got lunch on the calendar. And you really just dove right into the community and made a lot of fast friends and colleagues very quickly. Tori, tell us about how you and Ian first connected and your professional journey together.
Sure. It was around the same time. I was at Price Charities at the time, and we were developing a place-based initiative in City Heights. So our work definitely aligned there, and I had the opportunity to work with Ian as a community partner, which then a few years later translated over to, as I shared earlier, a change in roles and relationships, where he joined me at United Way of San Diego County and really was leading our community impact work. So it was a fun opportunity to work alongside him as a community partner, and then for him, and certainly have had the opportunity to learn a lot about leadership through the relationship I've had with Ian.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Awesome. And since you mentioned your shared overlap at United Way, I'd love to hear a little bit about in the team you built there. And obviously, you got to handpick amazing talent. But tell us a little bit about what team was handed to you and what you built and handed off to your successor, and leadership lessons learned along the way during your time here in San Diego.
Sure. So after, as you mentioned, and it was probably more like 2012, even though it probably seems longer for those in the audience who are like,
it's all a blur.
Track. Exactly. Coming to San Diego was a great opportunity for me, coming from Washington, D.C. The opportunity was to really listen to and be a part of what had become a grassroots movement, and to help lead that effort to solidify something either within city or county government, or within some kind of joint powers with the municipalities, to provide positive youth development opportunities. There is child welfare when kids are in harm's way. There is juvenile detention when they're outside of the law. But there really wasn't any entity that really focused on positive youth development. And so the community basically came together and said that that's what was needed after a spike in youth violence 6 years prior to that. And so I'd be remiss, I have to give a shout out to California Endowment that's really stood up and said, we see and hear the community, and we're going to put forth the seed funding to get this youth development office going. And so I came into San Diego to really listen, learn, hear, and to help lead that, what eventually became a Cradle to Career collective impact strategy. But as I transitioned to United Way of San Diego County, that organization too was in transition. And when I say that, around the whole Cradle to Career collective impact strategy as well. And so for me, it was really an opportunity to work on a bigger scale, and to also, as you mentioned, I inherited, quote unquote, some really good staff, and then, however, had to bring on folks. One of the first positions that I brought on, and I continue to do that, is someone for data research and evaluation, because I think that is key. I think, when you're working in nonprofits, you really have to follow the numbers. You really have to use data to drive not just your strategy, but honing on what the issues are, and then bring that to bear. So was fortunate to bring on that as a position there, and then just worked with the other great staff that they had at that organization to really, put these programming. A lot of it was already in place, but really to take it to the next level and think through how do you then do it from a collective perspective, right? How do you bring other players on board? I was fortunate enough to have, you mentioned Tori and some other staff that were already, steeped in this kind of Cradle to Career collective impact strategy. And so for me, it was really good to have more bandwidth and to have really good staff. So I've been fortunate to both bring on some really great people, but also to kind of have found some really great staff there as well.
And Ian, if we can go back to the initial job that brought you to San Diego, I think as we think about our audience today, they're very intrigued by the fact that we have an active, quote unquote, active candidate here today. So if we think about that perspective, you came to San Diego. You didn't have a deep bench of existing relationships to pull from, but your role was essentially cross-sector collaboration. Can you talk about what it was like for you as a candidate interviewing from across the country, but then coming in and establishing yourself to be successful?
Sure. It's interesting how that all unfolded, because I saw the opportunity. San Diego or Southern California had really been a dream of mine. And I said, at some point I'll make my way there, probably after retirement or sometime in the far, far future. And then I saw this position, and a friend of mine said, yeah, you should apply. It's, what's the difference, whether you're going to go now or go later, you might as well take a stab at it. And so I read it and thought it was really, really good. The idea of systems change was really, really attractive to me. And so what I knew though is that it would really be about the movement. It would really be about community. It would really be about residents. And I didn't want to be perceived as this outsider coming from Washington, D.C., telling local folks, what youth development looks like as the expert. And it's funny because in the documents that I got after I got the position, they had termed the position youth czar. That's what the community said they needed, right? They needed a youth czar, and I was like, "Ooh!" Like, I'm glad they didn't keep
call it something else.
So coming in as director, so in terms of the process, as you're asking, Tori, I was told after I was selected by a member of the selection committee that they were not going to go with me, that they thought that to bring someone from outside, even though on paper it was a good fit, they thought the community just wouldn't go for bringing someone in from out of town. And this is important for the audience to hear. The person who was leading the search saw on my resume that I worked at the national organization here in DC, and she was currently on the board there. And so she picked up the phone and she called the executive director and said, "I have this guy, Ian Gordon, here. What do you think?" And he said, "If I were you, I'd hire him." Now, he was not. So then she put me in the stack instead of just tossing my documents. So he was not a reference of mine. They had not gotten to the reference stage, but she had done her due diligence through her connections. And it was because of what he thought of me that got me in. Obviously, it led to me interviewing. And of course I had to, stand on my own 2 feet and, win them over. But just being included, as I said, they were not going to go with an outside candidate. So you just never know what's happening behind the scenes once you put forth your application. And so good relationships follow you.
Indeed. And we were not involved with that search of that placement. So nothing to do with that one. I'd love to drill down a little bit farther on that, Ian, and talk about your advice for any executive, having done this now a couple times yourself, cross-country moves, advice and insights you gained, and feel free to share, your on-the-ground experience moving back and forth, but transitioning not only into a new organization, but into a new community in on the other side of the country. What were some eye-openers for you going back and forth? And what would you share with other executives who might be thinking about a move like that someday?
Well, I think, you have to be ready for the move. I think that should precede the job opportunity. So I made up my mind that I wanted to make my way to California. This just happened to be the right vehicle. And so I think the notion of, selling my property in DC, moving across the country with 2 dogs in the back of my car, it all fell into place. And I think it all fell into place because I was ready for it. I had made the decision I was going to do it. The decision kind of the opportunity helped, but I was gonna do it anyway. So I was just looking for the right opportunity to make that change. I think it should, obviously not made on a whim. I will also mention that I was single at the time, so I can't speak to for those who have families. I know sometimes you want to be able to not just have a place to land for yourself, but for your significant other as well, and then your kids and school. And so I didn't have all those things to think about in all fairness, and so it was an easier decision for me. And I always thought I'll try it. hopefully it will work out with all good intentions. But if it doesn't, I can always come back. So I went in with eyes wide open and looking forward to the challenge and the opportunity that relocation brings.
Mm-hmm. Biggest surprise?
The culture, the difference in work culture, and in fact, I'm back now in Washington, D.C., having spent 9 years in San Diego. And one of the things coming back I thought about was now transitioning back to the different work culture. What I mean is that I think that this kind of hard charging 80-hour work week, if you on a good week 60, that tends to happen in a lot of nonprofits. I think one of the things that, from my experience, that California gets right is that you work just as hard, but you also recognize that you work to live and you don't live to work. That was definitely something that I took away from my experience in California. I've brought it back with me, and that's how I manage my staff as well. It's like, the work will be here again tomorrow, right? We're gonna fight the good fight today. We're gonna give it all we've got, but we didn't get into these challenges overnight, and we're not gonna get out of them overnight. So you might as well have balance in your work and work life.
Tori, can I put you on the spot for a second? I would love to hear, based on what Ian just shared, having been a member of Ian's team. Usually we ask our guests, tell us about your leadership style and whatnot, but this is a unique opportunity because we get to hear from his team about your reflections on Ian's leadership style and what you think made him really effective. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. And I'm sure Ian would too. This is like a post.
I know, right?
360 review.
As I was going to ask Ian, what is your greatest leadership moment or achievement? But I'd say, let me answer that. And it's the leader that you are and what you leave behind in the seats that you fill along the way. And what I mean by that is, Ian is an active listener. He cares, but he also knows how to walk that fine line with making the hard decisions, being the leader while talking through reasons why, sharing the why with you as hard decisions are made. But he leads with his character, with integrity, with heart. And he's not afraid to be a voice in the room. I think I can recall there was a time when we were in a meeting together and somebody pulled us aside. This may not be a surprise to some of the audience members today, but said, Ian and Tori, you need to sit back and quiet your mouth. You are speaking too much and you are taking, Ian, I don't know if you remember this.
I don't.
You are taking too much space. And we took that and said, no, looking at each of us, the individuals that we are, we've worked very, very hard to have our voice and have it be heard. And you pulled me aside and just, we went on that path for a minute, Ian, on that journey. And that stuck with me because there are certainly times when you're in community meetings or you're in team meetings and you're afraid to speak up. And now Trevor gets to enjoy that character trait of mine, for better or for worse. But it was the encouragement of, you have a voice and what you have to share is valuable. It may not be valuable to the people at that table in that moment of time, but it is valuable to somebody. So don't let it be silenced. And that always carried me through, Ian, to who I am today, is just that support and that demonstration of leadership that you left during our time together. And I'd say just, again, the heart and the true impact that Ian wants to make in the community. And I think if I can leave it with that, Trevor, but turn the question back on Ian with the impact that you've had. And there's clearly reasons why you've established yourself, you've led teams and communities, and you make the decision to move, which also gets us here today with you as a candidate. what are you most proud of in your leadership journey? If what I shared, do you even recognize that that's who you are as a leader? You've led a variety of teams, a variety of individuals in very different communities, as you just shared. So is there something that you are most proud of and who you have become as Ian Gordon, the nonprofit leader?
Well, I appreciate you hearing that, Tori, because I never go into it thinking, what's the legacy going to be, or what will people say, either when I'm in the room or not in the room. I just kind of, as you said, lead with a heart, kind of, my heart. If my heart's in it, then I know I'm in the right place. And so for me, what stands out is really, kind of, as I mentioned before, just leading, this cradle to career, what had become a grassroots movement, what became a collective impact strategy. But at the end of the day, it really is about bringing key cross-sector partners together to grapple with a problem, to pool resources, to then make a change in the lives of individuals in the community. And then to ultimately, from what you've learned, try to impact policy so that you're not here 50, 100 years from now grappling the same issues. You've actually solved it at its source. Because a lot of what we folks deal with in the community are, system-wide and structural inequities. And so for me, I think the achievement for me wasn't just about scale, but also about collaboration. I think their nonprofits and other organizations are too siloed. I think that philanthropy and other reasons and scarce resources cause folks to entrench and be like, oh, okay, I have to take care of my organization, and they're pit against each other, right? And so I think for me, it's really about aligning data, aligning resources, a shared vision to transform outcomes. And so for me, the experience that has shaped my leadership philosophy happens when you build strong coalitions and you move from programs to real systems change. And so that example that you gave, Tori, was really about, when I hear it, and I don't remember that, but it sounds, it kind of mirrors what I believe is that everyone has a voice, and that it really is about diversity of voices and people's perspective. I can't have a perspective that Trevor would bring, and I can't have a perspective that Tori brings. I only have my perspective. And so if each of you bring your perspective and I bring mine, that's what it enriches any organization or any team. And so I really do believe in making space for and being intentional about making sure that everyone has a voice and is able to contribute in their own way.
Fantastic. Tori, offline, I'm going to have to ask you, what was that meeting and who was the person who tried to shut this dynamic duo down? Gosh.
Offline conversation. And to that, before we move forward, let's acknowledge we're open for comments and questions. So Ian is here. If we can get to it during the show, we certainly will. Otherwise, we can respond via LinkedIn. But Trevor, go ahead. What's next?
Well, and to that point, Tori, we are all on LinkedIn, so feel free to follow up with any of us if there are particular questions that you'd like to send to all of us or any of us individually. On the topic of building a winning team and diversity of perspective that we were just digging into a little bit, obviously geography has a big part to do with our perspective and which part of the country and which part of the world we grew up in and where our career, there's where you grew up and where your career grew up, so to speak, too, right? And those can be very similar and sometimes very different too, our personal development and our professional development. One of the topics that comes up a lot, of course, because this is a show about building teams, is hiring, and especially at the executive level, but really at all levels, because it is a global talent market. The costs and benefits of hiring from outside the local market. And Ian is someone who has done that and who has been the hiree from outside the local market as well. And you shared a little bit about that hurdle you had to overcome. because you were not a local candidate, and so how you counteracted that. I'm going to share our philosophy on this, and then I'd love to hear your thoughts, and please do feel free to disagree on this. We always encourage organizations to look nationally for every role, not just for executive level positions. You always want to be benchmarking the best of what is in your home market against what is available nationally, because you don't want to make the easy hire because they are already there and potentially pass up the truly transformational candidate, which, yes, may come with some additional challenges of relocating them. But we all know that an A player can really have transformative change in just a short amount of time, whereas a B player basically protects the status quo and the organization tracks sideways. All things being equal, of course, there is a lot of value to being a local candidate. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, local versus national, and what are some of the unique upsides and downsides for an executive or any level position moving across the country to take a new role from the perspective of the hiring manager or the board?
Sure. So I'm going to first just say, because I have to get this out of the way, is that I am a big proponent of local workforce development, talent pipelines, and ensuring that you have homegrown talent for the jobs that you have in your local jurisdiction. The two don't have to be mutually exclusive. Having said that, and the reason why it doesn't have to be mutually exclusive is because I agree with you, Trevor. You have to get the talent wherever you can source it, and the best of the best for what your needs are. I think that, one of the things that I will say about selecting a candidate from outside of your local jurisdiction is that the care and thought that goes into taking that opportunity from someone who's outside of your area is next level, right? It's not just I'm just going to switch jobs and I'll, end this one on Friday and I'll be there on Monday, right? There's so many things that go into that you better believe that person is really about that position and all that comes along with it. So I think that, in terms of getting so I think that's one positive, right? Is that they're really serious about it because they've taken this move seriously. I think that we like to think that each of our local jurisdictions is unique, and I'm here to tell folks that it's not as unique as you think it is, right? I think that the things that make it unique, the person coming in can learn, right, and can get up to speed. And the folks I think you have to surround someone that you bring in from outside of your local jurisdiction with folks that are able to bring them up to speed. I have a dear colleague, and to this day we're still friends, who was part of the search committee for the Youth Development Office and the opportunity that brought me to San Diego. And she literally took me in her car and drove me around San Diego and introduced me to the key players. And in that car ride, she would tell me, okay, this is who this person is. We're kissing the ring because it's something you have to do. A year from now, you'll be able to boss them around. But for right now, this is the way, your entree to society, right? So I had someone who was able to do that to me because I was new from out of town. So I would say to anyone who's bringing someone in, show that courtesy, right? Don't just drop them in and expect them to figure it all out on their own. So some support is necessary when you're bringing someone in from out of town. And to the candidate that takes a job, from out of town, listen more than you speak. I know we just talked about voice, but listen more than you speak. Because folks want to be able to pour into you. Folks want to be able to, the last thing someone wants, and I think I said it earlier, is to think that, oh, you're coming out of town, you're going to tell us what to do. Oh, you're the expert. Like we don't know anything. What are we, chopped liver, right? We're podunk and you're coming from, wherever you're coming from with the expertise. So you don't want that dynamic. So come in, listen, hear, learn the culture, the cultural differences, because I did say that, we're more similar than we're different, but there are some cultural differences, whether it's East Coast, West Coast, Midwest, rural to urban. So however, wherever you're finding the difference, just make sure that you are listening to folks and learning quickly. when in Rome, do as the Romans do, is usually kind of my motto, right? I also love traveling the world, and that's one of the things that we get dinged for as Americans, is that we charge into other countries, and we want to be American, right? We want all the things in the way that we are, and there isn't deference to kind of, okay, you're in a foreign country, and these are their ways of doing things. Not to say you're not who you always are, or inauthentic, but you have to be cognizant of where you are. Try to speak the language. So the translation would, be more similar and kind of blend in, if you will, without losing who you are when you're doing that. But I'm a big proponent for hiring talent, as you mentioned, Trevor, from wherever you can find it. And you just want to make sure that folks that you're bringing in are supported, which should be the case always. And that, you'll find that folks are ready to roll up their sleeves and get to work, because they have made the decision to relocate.
Yeah. And in fact, we're giving a talk next week on succession. Actually, this weekend, twice this week, on succession planning, because it is such a hot topic, and it's a topic that Tori addressed earlier this month with Kristen Diggs in our prior session, which was awesome. But one of the things that we're big believers in is that succession planning is not just for CEOs. And that you need to be mindful of succession planning at all levels throughout the organization, because just because someone doesn't have a C-level title doesn't mean that their work is not integral to the daily operation and long-term success of an organization. And this more sort of a sharing out than a question, but that's one of the things that we see neglected a lot, is that everyone thinks about the board and transition planning, succession planning for the C-level, but it doesn't really extend beyond that. And so being really thoughtful and applying, everything that Ian just shared about transitioning into a new market, it doesn't just apply to the CEO. It would apply to any level candidate who is relocating, or any level candidate who's stepping into a new organization, for that matter. The principles and strategies of a successful onboarding and transition are the same, regardless of the level of position. It's just, the different levels that you're applying them to.
Absolutely.
To that end, Ian, what is next for you? What are you looking for in your next role? Which type of role? What are your absolute line in the sands that you need as far as the mission focus or the culture this time around? Any thoughts on that?
Absolutely. And I've given it a lot of thought. And, as Trevor was sharing about succession planning, I think that's a key retention tool, right? No matter where you are in the organization, you want to make, folks want to feel like there's some thought given, and that they are part of what's there next. And so, because if you don't, that employee will put into action their own succession planning. And so they may succession plan out. And so for me, after years of leading community impact work at legacy nonprofits, I was ready for a new chapter. And so I've achieved a lot. I've helped building strong partnerships, securing investments. I've helped move policy, which I'm really, proud of. But I want to bring these skills to an organization whose mission squarely aligns with my core values of equity and opportunity. And I think that at this stage, culture is as important to me as mission. I think mission gets a lot of focus, but I think culture is also important, the culture of the organization. Looking for a board and leadership team that values transparency, that values collaboration, and most importantly for me, bold action. And I say that because that's the kind of environment where, I and the organization can have the greatest impact. I think about where we are today versus where we were a decade ago. And I think this is not the time to shrink. This is not the time for nonprofits to retreat and entrench. This is the time to be bold. And so I am feeling that, just personally. And
Mhm.
so I want to be part of an organization that is not afraid now to be bold.
Mhm.
And the backdrop, whether it is, public funding lost, or, whether it is, more people in need. I think that's exactly the time when you need to be bold. I said it earlier, we didn't get here overnight,
Mhm.
and we're not going to get out of it overnight. But at the same time, one of the things that I don't believe is the role of the nonprofit is to be um, around indefinitely. I think nonprofits should be working themselves out of a job. And what I mean by that is nonprofits are around to solve the problem, right? To work with community to ensure that they're no longer needed. I think a good day in the life of a nonprofit is when you close your doors because whatever it was that your mission was, right, that issue
Mhm.
has gone away. Now, I know folks are thinking, these are some big issues, right? We're talking about whether it's homelessness or solving the housing crisis, or whether it's about, skilling folks for the industries currently, or industries in the future. I'm not saying that, those things won't go away, but what I am saying is that we should be bolder in terms of really addressing these issues in new and innovative ways.
Mhm.
So if you're programming as you did, and I will say this, if you're programming now as you did 10 years ago, you're missing the boat, right?
Mhm.
Because things have changed so dramatically. And if you bring people with lived experience to the table, you'll hear that.
Mhm.
Right. And so I'll take, and I'm not a homelessness expert, but I happen to know that homelessness now doesn't look like it did. Right. There are folks living in storage units.
Mhm.
Right. We've known of folks living in cars. But I think folks are programming homelessness, for instance, as though folks are living under a bridge. Now, there's some there, but the large majority of what it means to be unhoused now, which I like that term just on face value, because
Mhm.
it means that you're unhoused. It doesn't mean that you are just out there blowing in the wind. And so if we overlook people who are, you used to be able to walk down the street literally and count
Mhm.
for people, and you come up with a homelessness number. Now that's increasingly undercounted because folks are couch surfing or just bouncing around from place to place, but with no stability. And so what does that mean for how you fund the work? What does that mean for what you programmatically that looks like? And what does that mean for policies that need to be put in place? Completely different from 10 years ago. So for me, it's a long way of saying, organizations that are ready to be bold, ready
Mhm.
to say we're going to do things differently, we're going to be innovative. And I know that's a term that's thrown around a lot, but it really does mean thinking differently. And most importantly, I look at boards and I look at organizational makeup and who's informing program policy and practice. And there's seldom the folks that are impacted who are providing input. They're experts too. They're experts with lived experience. And so as we think about, all well-intentioned, how do we go about, and I don't even like the term serving, but I'm going to use it, serving any population, you should be including their voice as experts to part of the solution.
Mhm.
Mhm.
I'm going to ask a question about the macro environment since we started to touch on the big picture. And again, without making this a political conversation at all, but I would love to hear your thoughts on sort of the pulse of the sector, if you will, being based in Washington, D.C., obviously where federal policy is shaped and enacted, but also the seat of a enormous amount of nonprofit organizational activity. And so many nonprofits, both national and international organizations, have their headquarters there in DC. And I'll start by sharing what we've sort of observed over the last few months and few weeks, and that there's been a ton of uncertainty injected into the nonprofit sector, which makes hiring really difficult. It makes planning really difficult. It makes fundraising really difficult. The nonprofit sector has definitely taken some significant body blows.
Mm-hmm.
But now what we are sensing is that firstly, having survived the pandemic as a sector, that we've built a lot of resiliency and toughness between 2020 and call it 2023 that has prepared the sector for a lot of these cuts. And so most recently we had the budget bill pass. I can't name a single nonprofit organization that was excited about that bill. It's passed. And it's now in the rearview mirror. And it feels to us that organizations are looking forward, that they are not planning, thankfully, like they were 10 years ago, as you said, that they are being forward looking, and that organizations are getting on with the work and they're getting back to building their teams. And that hiring activity is picking up, and just the conversations about getting back to filling some positions that had been in the plans for a while. It's finally happening. Unfreezing of hiring activity, because we're now moving forward, because that uncertainty has been taken off the deck for the time being. Are you feeling that as well, both as a candidate and someone who's connected to a lot of nonprofit organizations around the country, or are you seeing and feeling something totally different? What's sort of your take on the pulse of the sector?
So it's interesting, and again, this is my take. One of the things you said, Trevor, is that nonprofits have been around for the oldest ones are a century and a half, and nonprofits will continue to be around as long as you have people. You'll have the need for organizations to provide programming and services. Even though I said we should be working our ways out of a job, I think it's safe to say that it's some form of nonprofit will always be around. So having said that, the work is there, right? The work is there to be done in communities. And whether there is bust or boom in terms of funding, public funding or private funding, the work needs to be done. So it really is a matter of, is it going to be done on a skeleton staff? And we're, burning people out, and we're really, pedal to the metal, going full steam ahead, or is it going to be, like the cycle that we just came out of, where you had philanthropic organizations, like Mackenzie Scott and others, funding organizations with the kind of transformative gifts to help with the administrative costs and others, however you wanted to use it. Or are you back to really being scrappy? And I think nonprofits, it's an accordion. And I think nonprofits are able to navigate that much better. I think, however, what happens is that the folks that need the nonprofit services, they're the ones that kind of bear the brunt of less or more services when this happens. In terms of where the sector is, I think you're absolutely right, Trevor. It used to be that you had a 10-year cycle of nonprofits in terms of whether that accordion effect, right? Whether they're expanding or
it's a 10-year accordion.
Exactly. Whether you're expanding or contracting, depending on what's going on. I think in the last year, it's been almost like a monthly accordion, right? It's like, there's no funding. Okay, here's some funding. So folks are a little uneasy. And so what I've seen, I would say since March or February until now, is that it was, first of all, the uncertainty, right? Of let's just pause, kind of frozen in place, do what we need to be done, but we're not we can't think beyond the present moment. And then it was, okay, we're losing funding, so we might have to now think about how we're going to contract and how it's going to look differently from how it always has been. And then now I think we're coming out of that kind of like, okay, this might be the new norm. Let's settle into this and let's figure out how we're going to make up for what we know is not coming from our typical sources. So I think this is now the time when I'm calling for more innovation, more bold thinking. Another term that I don't necessarily like, but I'll use it, is more out of the box thinking, right? And borrow from other industries, right? Who are used to this, right? Maybe you're 100-year-old startup, right? You didn't think of yourself as a startup before. You thought of yourself as this, organization juggernaut, but now maybe you need to be thinking and be more nimble as a startup is. How do startups, navigate, that environment? Maybe there are lessons there. So I think that it really is about not doing things as this is not a normal time. We've been here before, but in some ways, this is all uncharted territory. So it really does take, and I think that when folks are thinking about hiring, whether it's at the executive level or not, I think that thinking in, looking for folks in unusual places that can bring thinking that's not typical of nonprofits, right? And so speaking as a seasoned nonprofit professional, I'm not offended by that. I happen to think of myself as a little bit more entrepreneurial than the typical nonprofit employee, just because that's the way I'm wired. So I'm always thinking of okay, how can we? And I actually owned a business as well, so I know what it's like to have everything on your shoulders. You have to make it happen. It's not a grant that you have that has laid out for several years so you can cool on. You pretty much have to, that too, Trevor, as a business owner yourself. You're constantly thinking about, okay, you don't have time to rest on your laurels because you're always kind of figuring out what's the next, how are we going to keep this going, how are we going to expand on this, if this isn't the right direction to go in for whatever reason, how can we use the skills that we have and the talent that we have to perhaps pivot to do something else. Now, this does not mean mission creep. It does not mean you overnight become a whole different organization. But what it does mean is that you have to be a little bit more, think holistically, right? If you think about, when I speak with staff, I say, okay, think about a family unit or an individual. They may show up with one issue. They came to you because they want a better job because they're not making ends meet. I'm sure that's not the only issue. You have a conversation with them. I'm sure that, their housing is tenuous. I'm sure that their kids may or may not have all they need for school or may not be doing well. And so when you think of an individual as a whole person and you think about our issues as interrelated, then it could be about, okay, we're doing 6 things. We're used to doing 6 things as an organization. Maybe we do the 3 best things that we know how and partner with an organization that does the other 3. Okay, that could be one way to go. So you're not, everything to everyone, but you're really honing. Now that means that, you might be leaner, you might be known for providing, but those are the 3 best things that you do. Because one of the things that we tend to do, we were guilty of as nonprofit leaders, is trying to be everything to everyone. And in a environment where you're flush with funding and you can do all of that, I still don't think you should be doing that. But I think especially now, you should be finding who are partners, who are the folks that, when you think about the individual and rounding out all the needs of the community, you should be partnering. There's no nonprofit that shouldn't say we have 3 or 4 partners that we go in together. We leverage our resources. We'll go after new resources given our shared interests. And together we will wrap ourselves around the community on these particular issues. So it just takes a different way of thinking. But you're absolutely right, Trevor, that, having your pulse on your community first. You don't have to have your pulse on Washington, D.C., but have your pulse, you're on the pulse of your local community. And bring stakeholders together and strategically think about how you can pivot to meet the needs of your community.
And we have a question coming in for you, Ian. When you start to feel ready for the C-suite, what signals in your career should you pay attention to that indicate it's the right time to apply at that level? Is readiness mostly about years of experience, or do boards and search committees tend to value more qualitative markers?
Interesting.
I guess we could sum that up as, when do you know when you're really feeling the executive itch?
Yeah.
Right. And I want to kind of, hone in on the feel ready. What does feel ready mean? And that, to me, that's it. Are you feeling that? Is it an age thing? I'm at this age and stage in my life where I should make the next step. Or is it that I feel that I have more I can contribute on that level? And I think that that's the question, right? Is that to get to this, to transition to the C level really should be about the alignment of both your heart's desires, your skills, and also what you can contribute on that level, because it really is about contributing in a different way. I believe that you'll know when it's the right time, but you should also, if you're looking within your organization to move up within, then you should look at, okay, do I see myself as one of those, because those will now be your peers. So you're looking at your C level and you're like, okay, what is the culture there? How are they making decisions? If you have an purview into that, and what can I contribute? What can I bring? Because what you want to do is separate yourself both from your colleagues, and you want to be able to say, okay, here's what I bring. After years of doing this work directly, let's just say, I now understand some of the top-down decisions that impact the work that I'm doing, and here's how I can then lend a voice that's not there. And these are the skills that I can contribute. So I say readiness really is about what can you bring? Can you bring, do you feel like you can now bring something to that C-level, C-suite? And then the qualitative is also important. That's important at all levels, right? In terms of, you want to have, the emotional readiness and maturity to bring to that, but you also want to understand that at the C level, you're also thinking, and this is probably a little bit controversial, but at the C level, you're now invested in ensuring that the organization is viable and that the organization continues, forward. Mm-hmm. So you're transitioning now out of being in the weeds in the program level to now making decisions that will sometimes be contrary to what happens at the program level. And that's in the best interest of the organization. Mm-hmm. And I think as when I first became, transitioned from program management into the C-suite, I grappled with that because I was now making decisions that were best for the organization and may not necessarily be best for either my colleagues or best for those that we serve. Mm-hmm. So you then become part of the machine, and it takes a special person to do that, right? And you have to grapple with that and understand that these are tough decisions that you have to make, and you have to be dispassionate about it. You can be passionate about the work you're doing, mm-hmm. but you're dispassionate when you get to the C level. Not that you don't care about the work, but the decisions are now bigger than just how many people are we going to serve to, this week, or how are we going to make our programmatic goals? It's really about the viability of the organization and making decisions to make sure that the organization is going to be around in the future, currently and in the future. So it's a different, I want to make sure that folks are ready to kind of transition into that kind of a headspace, mm-hmm. And understand that it is a good transition. I encourage it. You want to bring people to the C-suite for sure, mm-hmm. but know what you're signing up for.
Mm-hmm. But and I would also add, I would couple that, Ian, yes, and yes, with applying that whole framework that Ian just laid out to your personal life as well, mm-hmm. right? Because you cannot separate personal and career, right? The choices you make in your career will profoundly impact your personal life, and your personal life will profoundly impact the choices you make in your career. And at the end of the day, we always coach clients that we work with in our coaching practice that you have to do what's the right choice for you. Absolutely. And there is a lot of social and professional pressure, especially here in the US, to keep climbing, right? Mm-hmm. Keep climbing. And because you got one promotion, you got to go for the next, and you got to go for the next. And I think there may be some reluctant CEOs out there that maybe they were totally fine at the level they were at, but right. they felt this pressure to go for the next and go for the next. And I'm a strong believer that we are most effective in work when we have balance in harmony with our personal life as well. And if taking that next role is going to throw your personal life out of whack, it's not the right time or it's not the right move. And I would step back and ask myself, am I doing this for me and my organization and my values and what I feel is my purpose here on this planet? Or am I doing it because the money looks good, the prestige, the social pressure? And there is nothing wrong with turning down an opportunity if it is not right for you or it's not the right time. So I think sometimes we forget to do that personal inventory and take a deep look at our personal lives and what's going on there. Because to your point, Ian, you have to say, am I ready for this? Do I want this? Or, do I want this and I'm not getting it in my current organization? Now I know I really need to go out and find it. So I think that's a really important part of the equation. And we are coming up on time. I've got one more question, and then Tori.
Can I add to that, Trevor, before we move on, just from a staff perspective too, that is, at the perimeter of that C-suite, don't lose sight on the impact that you have as a staff person. In any role that you have within an organization, you still have the ability to influence, to support the change that is necessary at the C-level from any seat that you hold within an organization. I think oftentimes folks might feel that the power is at the top. Oftentimes it might be, but there is still so much power, resilience, smarts, intelligence, contributions to be had from every seat within an organization. So back to the voice piece, what you contribute to the team. So if the C-suite is not where you want to be for your work-life balance, or just it's not in your journey ahead, know that you are still making a pivotal impact on the success of the organization, and you are still a change maker in the community from whatever seat you have within an organization. And I say that to even credit the receptionists at the front desks at some of our local nonprofit organizations. You are that first point of contact for clients, for funders. You are effectively contributing to the success of an organization too. So oftentimes we get lost on the North Star of the C-suite, but know that you are just as important as the folks making the hard decisions.
100%. All those positions matter. We are almost at time. Ian, I was going to ask one last question from the perspective of the candidate. What words of advice would you have for boards and organizations who are hiring from the candidate's perspective if they want to create processes that are inviting and engaging for the candidate so that they can get the best talent possible? And then Tori, I'll let you close us out because we've got just 3 minutes left.
Sure.
Okay. So, the challenge for boards and for those hiring is sometimes, looking for what I call a unicorn, right? Someone who is both a visionary strategist and a detailed, operator, and has fundraising experience, but policy chops and can manage change all at once, right? And, I think that's something that I think will cause a lot of frustration, may lead you to, hiring the wrong candidate. I think what I've seen too in nonprofits is that there's a rise of leaders coming from the private sector into nonprofit roles, right? And so what I would say to kind of experienced nonprofit executives, who sometimes find themselves competing against candidates, with that kind of profile, is that, maybe they have more corporate polish, but they are less community grounded. Right. So what this means is that you have to be intentional about showing your own depth of nonprofit experience, and that the fact that you're exactly what the organization needs to navigate the complexity of the work. And so I think that for me, the advice would be, think through that, or resist that tendency to look for that unicorn, right? Someone, can do it all, right? And really think about bringing in someone, and not to say, that you can't bring folks in from other industries, or I don't want to have this, for-profit, corporate, nonprofit battle versus, but it really is more about kind of doubling down and realizing that If it is a unicorn that you're looking for, you probably are setting yourself up. It really is. It should be more about what are the needs, the direct needs that you have. Be realistic about that. Be realistic about the candidate, and be realistic about what any one person can do. I think part of running a nonprofit is that you feel we tend to have what should be a 3-person.
Mm-hmm.
3 jobs. We're smashing them together because we want one person who can do them all.
Yeah.
And I think we have to be understanding that you don't want to, because from the candidate perspective, you read these and you're like, only after decades of experience can you really do all of what someone's asking. But then they're saying they're looking for someone with 3 to 5 years experience or something like that, right? But they're supposed to have all this depth of experience. The skill of a fundraiser is going to be very different from the skill of, someone who, can steward a project once they've received it, right? And many nonprofits don't have the luxury of saying, oh, we have a fundraising team and then we have a program team. They're looking for someone who can do all of these things. So what I would say to them is kind of narrow it down a little bit, right? Find what's most important and cultivate the folks in your organization that's already there. I think one of the things that I have that's helped me along the way to become the leader that I've become is that I've been given opportunity while I was in my job, right? So it's not always about the next job. And I know, especially earlier on in your career, you want to take on as much as you can, because you're building that resume, right? You're taking these things on that one day you'll look back and be like, wow, I did all of this, and you didn't realize while you were doing it that you're really building that. And so for those that are looking, I would just say be a little bit more realistic with what have your wish list, maybe in your back pocket somewhere, but tailor your search and your jobs as you build them to not be like, we want one person to come in and do all the things that we need to get done. Because what that translates to is, first of all, a frustrating process. But when you finally get that person, it's going to probably lead to burnout, and just not be very realistic.
Well, I wholeheartedly agree. I would say rock stars actually exist. Unicorn. Absolutely. Find a rock star, not a unicorn. Awesome.
Absolutely.
Ian, thank you so much. Tori, you want to close us out because we are slightly over time.
I do certainly want to close out, and I don't need to share words. Instead, I'm sharing Heather Whitley Quinn's comment.
We have to give Heather a shout out.
Yes, it sums you up perfectly. We appreciate your time, sharing your experience both as a nonprofit leader and an active candidate with us. And please pay attention to our LinkedIn page. There may be additional comments and questions popping up there. We will certainly respond to you in a timely manner. But Ian, again, thank you so much. And it's been a pleasure seeing you again, having you on with Trevor as well. So join us on our next episode and do stay in touch, Ian.
Thank you. Thanks, Tori. Thanks, Ian. Trevor. My pleasure.
We'll see you next time.
Bye.
Mm-hmm.